So you rent the capital, you rent some machine to run. Okay, so it's the rent, it's the wage. So the total cost comes from these two parts. The total cost comes from these two parts. And for a specific labor capital combination, labor, say labor 0, capital 0. What about your cost? What about your cost? Your cost, say C0, would be W. W is actually a market price, right? A market price, a labor market price. Okay, so we have two vector markets, one for labor, one for capital. So for the labor market, we have labor demand, we have labor supply, and price is wage. So we have a market price, right? And with capital, we have capital demand, capital supply, and the price is R, rent. And there is another market price for R, right? So we have W star, R star, W, R. Actually, is the equilibrium prices for these two vector markets. So, given this combination, C0 would be W L0 plus R K0. Do you think it's difficult? It's fine, right? It's fine. All right. So, given this equation, your cost is composed of two terms, WL, RK. What do you think this equation will be appeared in the diagram?
It's just like the budget line. It will
Yes.
change it to
Not necessary to be tangent, actually. It depends. So it would be a straight line, right? It would be a straight line. Think about this. If I say, oh, your cost is $100, and it's W L plus RK, this is the variable. All right, so let me make it easier. 2 and 5. So the wage rate is 2, the rent is 5. So what do you think this will appear in the diagram? It will be a straight line, right? With a negative slope. Is it clear for you? Or if you don't, think about this. Two x plus 5y equals 100. It must be for xy plane. It must be 50 here and 20 here, right? It will be a straight line with a negative slope. Is that clear? And what about 2x plus 5y equals 200? It will be doubled, right? So, either the first one or the second one. We call this a cost line. It's a cost line. It's a straight line. The reason why it is straight is because 2 and 5 are exogenous for us because they are market prices and we are price taker. We have to take these input prices as given. Okay? So, the cost curve or the cost line will look like this. And what about the slope? What about the slope for the cost curve? about the slope? Let's from here. What about the slope for this curve? The slope would be negative 2/5. Is that right? Because you may rewrite this into y equals 20 minus 2/5x. Is that right? So this is just as P1 if you regard this as Q1. This is just as P2 if you regard this as Q2. So the slope would be negative wage rate over rent. Okay? So this would be negative wage over rent. So how many of you feel confused? Very confused for this hour's class or this hour's content. Let's go through from the very beginning. So even you don't know this, but I told you, okay, this is the production function. Q equals F of capital and labor, which means we utilize capital and labor as inputs to produce our output Q. Okay? So we have labor, capital to produce outputs, and these curves are the so-called isoquants. 等产量曲线, okay? Isoquants. And the more inputs, the more labor, the more capital, the more input, the more output. Is quite intuitive, right? So on a specific isoquant, all combinations can produce the same level of output. Is that all right? And if we fixed the level of capital, if we want to produce Q0, the labor we need is at least L0. Okay? So the combination of L0 capital 1 bar can produce Q0. And capital 1 bar with L1 can produce Q1. With L2 can produce Q2. Okay? So the corresponding short-run production function would be when capital is fixed at the level K1 bar. So with L1 corresponds to Q0, L0, L1 corresponds to Q1, L2 corresponds to Q2. Yes? Louder, please. Raise your... I don't want you just skip to something very far from here, alright? Just focus on what we are talking about. Okay, okay. That would be some topic in the next semester, envelope curve. So it's about short run and long run correspondence. So just focus on what we are talking about. Don't go too far. Any question here?
So just like the isoquant, all, I mean the cost on every bundle on the coastline provides the same. I mean the different combination or bundles of capital and the labor provides the identical quantity of cost. Is that right? Every point on the cost line.
Yes, yes. All right, what he is asking is that given a total cost, WL plus RK is just like given this equation, 2x plus 5y equals 100. So this curve or this straight line corresponds to this equation, right? So all combination of x and y on this straight line will give us a 100 result, right? So if this is the labor cost, the cost of for capital, cost for labor, cost for capital, then the sum of them would be the total cost, which would be 100. So on a cost line, if this is a cost line, on one cost line, all combination on the same cost line gives us the same cost, total cost. Is that clear? Okay. So the red lines, the parallel straight lines, or the parallel straight lines, we call them cost lines, is for cost. And the cost is C equals WL plus RK. The slope would be negative W over R, just like the budget line. So in the past, we talk about a consumer who want to maximize whose utility given a specific budget line. But now, we reverse the problem that if we want to produce Q0 given a specific output level, we'd like to know what kind of combination can minimize the cost. So, if you are required to produce this level of output, to minimize would be here, right? If you are required to produce Q1, to minimize your cost would be like here. Q2 would like here. And Q3 would be like here. Okay? So just like we want to minimize our expenditure, now it's almost the same issue here. So as a firm, of course you wanted to produce your outputs, but also you have to take into account the cost. Okay? So you don't want to waste your inputs. Too much inputs to produce just a little bit output. You would not do that. Okay? So you want to make your cost as small as possible. So you minimize your cost. So today's the third hour here. I just introduced you the production function and the concept of short run and long run. Short run means some factor is fixed, just cannot vary, but in the long run, all factors can be varied. And I introduced to you labor capital, iso-quants, and iso-cost curve. Iso-quant and iso-cost curves. Okay? Any question here? All right, for this week's assignment,